13,000 of them rolled off American assembly lines. They fought in the snow of the Eastern Front, in the sand of North Africa, in the hedgerows of Normandy, and in the mud of the Philippines. Today, if you searched every museum, every barn, and every private collection on this planet, you would find fewer than 250. So where did the other 12,700 go? The answer is not one story, it is six. 6 countries, 6 very different endings, and one of them ends with an American half-track still driving into battle more than 20 years after the United States Army declared it obsolete. This is what actually happened to the M2 half-track. First, let us be clear about what this machine was, because most people get it wrong. The M2 was not a troop carrier. That was its bigger brother, the M3. The M2 was a gun tractor, a prime mover. Its job was to drag artillery through ground that would swallow a truck whole, and to keep pace with tank columns whenever the roads allowed it. 2 wheels at the front for steering, 2 rubber band tracks at the rear for grip. It was a compromise machine, and everybody who rode in one knew it. It was slower than a truck. It was weaker than a tank. The armor was thin enough that a heavy machine gun could punch straight through the sides, and the open roof meant a single mortar round landing nearby could kill every man inside. The crews had a nickname for it. They called it the Purple Heart Box. And yet America built 13,000 of them. Because for all its flaws, the thing worked. It towed the guns, it hauled the ammunition, it carried the wounded, it went where the trucks could not follow. By May of 1945, it had done everything that was ever asked of it. Which is exactly when the real trouble started. Victory created a logistics nightmare that almost nobody had planned for. Across Europe and the Pacific, Allied quartermasters began counting what was left. What they found was not a fleet, it was a mess. Some half-tracks were sitting in crates at rear depots in Belgium, still smelling of factory paint. Others were rotting in ditches in Western Germany, with shell holes torn through the hull. Lend-Lease survivors in Soviet motor pools had covered thousands of miles on roads that barely deserved the name. Estimates from the period suggest that somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 M2 variants were still classed as serviceable. But serviceable was doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. These were machines that had been driven, in many cases, across an entire continent, under fire, with maintenance that ranged from careful to none at all. So the men in charge of the wreckage faced one simple question, and the way they answered it decided the fate of thousands of vehicles. Was a used half-track worth more as a vehicle, or as metal? In 1946, the answer was metal, almost every single time. Here is why. The half-track was mechanically complicated compared to an ordinary lorry. It needed specialist parts that no civilian factory was making anymore. Its track links wore out, and nobody outside the army produced replacements. And the 2 industries that were desperate for cheap surplus vehicles, farming and construction, did not want it. A farmer wanted a truck he could fix himself. A builder wanted something that ran on tires and did not chew up a road surface. Nobody wanted a fighting vehicle with a hungry engine and a supply chain that had just been shut down. Meanwhile, Europe was starving for steel. Cities had to be rebuilt, bridges had to be replaced, and a half-track that failed a basic mechanical inspection was worth more melted down than driven away. So the scrapping began, and it was brutal in its efficiency. Some met an even blunter end. At American training ranges in Bavaria, including the enormous area at Grafenwöhr, condemned half-tracks were towed out onto the gunnery ranges and used as targets. Vehicles that had carried men from the beaches of France to the German border spent their final afternoons being shot to pieces by the army that built them. The practice was eventually cut back for being wasteful, but by then the damage was done. But not every half-track died in a smelter or on a firing range. Some of them were about to be handed a second war. France took the largest single share. The French army in 1945 was rebuilding itself out of almost nothing. It carried the fragments of the Free French forces, the memory of 1940, and an urgent need for anything with an engine and armor plate. Through direct military transfers negotiated in 1945 and 46, France accepted roughly 2,800 half-tracks of various marks. The M2 in particular was prized, because the French needed exactly what it had been designed for: gun towing. And then France sent them to Indochina. From 1946 onward, American half-tracks were grinding down narrow tracks in what is now Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, and everything that made the vehicle brilliant in Europe now worked against it. The open roof, which gave a crew visibility in an open field, made them helpless when grenades came down from above. The thin side armor, acceptable against rifle fire in Normandy, meant very little in a close-range ambush at 10 meters. And the roads, hemmed in by jungle on both sides, were a gift to anyone waiting with a mine. French mechanized units in Indochina took savage punishment in the opening years of that war. Very few of the half-tracks shipped east ever came home to France in any condition worth repairing. They were cannibalized, abandoned, or simply left where they died. Britain, by contrast, handled the whole thing with a shrug. The British had received M2 half-tracks under Lend-Lease, but they never built them into their armored doctrine the way the Americans did. When the war ended, the British Army held perhaps 600 of them scattered across various theaters. Technically, the Lend-Lease agreements said those vehicles had to be returned to the United States, or paid for. Nobody in London or Washington seriously wanted to load several hundred exhausted half-tracks onto ships and send them back across the Atlantic. So the two governments did the sensible thing and settled it with money instead. British engineers went through the stock at depots in Germany and in the Suez Canal zone. Fewer than 200 were kept for training and experimental work. The rest were sold locally or scrapped. And it is that phrase, sold locally, that changes everything. Because in 1947 and 1948, there were people watching very carefully to see exactly which scrapyards the British were emptying. Israel had no tanks. Israel had no arms industry worth the name. Israel was under an arms embargo, and it was weeks away from a war with several neighboring armies at once. What it had was people willing to buy military hardware as scrap metal, move it quietly across Europe, and put it back together on the other end. Half-tracks came from British surplus, from American surplus, from dealers who did not ask questions, and from communities abroad who raised the money to pay them. Somewhere between 250 and 350 half-tracks of various marks reached the country around the Declaration of Independence in May of 1948. And then Israeli workshops did something the original designers never imagined. They bolted on whatever would fire. Recoilless rifles, 20mm cannon, machine gun mounts welded up by hand, locally built weapon systems that existed nowhere else on Earth. If America had built a compromise, Israel built a Frankenstein. And the Frankenstein worked. These vehicles fought in 1948. They fought again in 1956. And now remember the promise from the beginning of this video. In 1947, the United States Army formally declared the M2 half-track obsolescent, finished, a relic of the last war. 20 years later, in 1967, American-built half-tracks were still rolling forward under fire in the Sinai. Some stayed on Israeli strength for years beyond even that. The machine America threw away had the longest and hardest working career of its entire class, in the hands of a country that could not afford to throw anything away at all. You can still stand in front of one today, at the Armored Corps Memorial at Latron, in Israel, parked in the open air. The Soviet story is much shorter, and in its own way much colder. Under Lend-Lease, records point to roughly 340 M2 half-tracks reaching the Soviet Union between 1942 and 1945. The Red Army used them the way they were meant to be used, as artillery prime movers. Soviet crews were not impressed. Accounts from veterans describe the half-track as temperamental and demanding compared to the American trucks they genuinely loved, the Studebakers that hauled the Red Army across Eastern Europe. By 1947, most Soviet half-tracks had been declared obsolete and struck from the order of battle. A handful went to Poland, a handful more to Czechoslovakia. Then they quietly disappeared. And here is the detail that tells you everything. The Soviet Union reverse-engineered a great deal of foreign equipment it admired. Aircraft, trucks, radios, entire bombers, rivet for rivet. The highest compliment the Soviets could pay a piece of foreign hardware was to copy it. The M2 never received that compliment. Back in the United States, the ending was slower, but no kinder. The Army's post-war force structure review in 1947 marked the M2 as obsolescent, though National Guard units held on to theirs for a few more years. Demilitarized examples went under the hammer at surplus auctions from 1946 onward for a few $100s each, depending on condition. Less than the price of a new car. A small number found civilian work. A few ended up on ranches in the American Southwest, where their cross-country traction turned out to be genuinely useful. Tracks that had crossed France finished their working lives crossing scrub and sand, dragging stumps and fence posts. But the deepest reason the half-track vanished was not rust, and it was not the scrap merchants. It was an argument that the half-track lost. The whole concept, wheels at the front and tracks at the back, was a compromise built for the technology of the 1930s. After the war, both superpowers moved on. The Americans fielded the M75, and then in 1960, the M113, fully tracked, aluminium-hulled, cheap to build, easy to maintain, and produced in numbers that made it one of the most common armored vehicles in history. The M113 did the half-track's job, and did it better, without splitting the difference. So the M2 was not destroyed. It was out-argued. It was made irrelevant by a change in thinking, which is a far quieter death than being blown apart on a range in Bavaria, and a far more permanent one. Which brings us back to the number we started with. Of the 13,000 M2 half-tracks built between 1940 and 1944, by the White Motor Company, by Autocar, and by Diamond T, the number surviving today anywhere in the world is estimated at somewhere between 180 and 250. That is around 2%. Some sit in museums in the United States and in France. One waits in Normandy, recovered from the French countryside decades after the fighting ended. Perhaps 60 to 80 are in private hands across America, Belgium and Britain, in every condition from fully restored runner to a bare hull sitting under a tarpaulin, waiting for an owner with more money than sense. And they are still being found. Hulls are still dragged out of French rivers, driven into the water in the chaos of 1944, and left there. Archaeological surveys on Pacific islands, including Leyte and Luzon, have identified half-track remains buried or submerged where they were abandoned. Most will never be recovered. Tropical corrosion and remote jungle make the cost impossible to justify. So that is the real answer. 13,000 machines, each one representing thousands of hours of American industrial labor and the accumulated tactical thinking of an entire generation of military planners, scattered, sold, shot at, scrapped, and very nearly erased inside a single decade. The survivors, scattered from La Trun to Normandy, from Virginia to a farmyard in rural Belgium, are not just old vehicles. They are the evidence of something harder to accept. The M2 half-track never lost its war. It just outlived the reason it existed. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe, because the next one is bigger. America built almost 50,000 Sherman tanks. What happened to those after 1945 is a story that runs through 4 decades of Cold War, across a dozen armies, and it is stranger than anything you have just heard. Thanks for watching.